You built nothing without us. We supported you emotionally through every single struggle. My mother stood in the conference room of Glenspire Health, my company, her voice echoing off the glass walls. My father nodded beside her, arms crossed. My sister Vanessa held up her phone, recording everything. We deserve compensation for the emotional labor we provided during your journey. I sat at the head of the table, my lawyer Theodore positioned to my right. The lawsuit papers lay between us, crisp and absurd. They were suing me for $24 million in emotional damages. The number felt random and desperate, like they had calculated 33% of my net worth and decided that seemed fair. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old. 6 years ago, I turned 27 on a Wednesday in March. I spent that birthday alone in my studio apartment in Portland, Oregon, eating leftover Chinese food and working on a business plan that would eventually become worth $73 million. My phone never rang that day. Not once. The only person who acknowledged my existence was the Uber driver who picked me up from the grocery store that evening. He saw the small cake in my bag and wished me well. My family had not forgotten. They simply did not care. The biotechnology industry was brutal and unforgiving, but I had found my niche in developing specialized equipment for pharmaceutical research laboratories. Glenspire Health manufactured precision instruments that reduced contamination in drug development processes. We held patents on 3 revolutionary devices. Our client list included some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. And now my parents and my sister believed they deserved a third of everything I had built. Your claims lack legal foundation, Theodore said quietly. He was 56, methodical, and expensive. Emotional support is not a quantifiable business contribution. She would not have succeeded without our encouragement, my father said. His name was Gerald, and he had spent my entire childhood telling me I was not smart enough for science. He worked in insurance sales and believed the world operated on charisma rather than competence. I remembered being 15 and showing him my acceptance letter to a summer program at the State University for gifted students in biology. He had barely glanced at it before returning to his newspaper. That is nice, Audrey. Your sister got asked to homecoming by the quarterback. Vanessa was 2 years older than me. She had been the center of every family photograph, every dinner conversation, every milestone celebration. When she graduated high school with a 3.2 grade point average, they threw her a party with 200 guests. When I graduated with a 4.0 and a full scholarship to the State University, they took me to a chain restaurant and spent the entire meal talking about Vanessa's new boyfriend. You never encouraged me, I said now, my voice steady. You did not attend my college graduation. You did not call me on my 27th birthday. You did not visit me when I was hospitalized with pneumonia 3 years ago. We were busy, my mother said. Her name was Patricia, and she had perfected the art of rewriting history. We always believed in you. You told me I was wasting my time when I started this company. You said I should get a real job. We were protecting you from disappointment. I looked at Vanessa. She was 35 now, divorced, living with our parents again after her boutique clothing store failed. She had borrowed $40,000 from them 2 years ago and never paid it back. They had called it an investment in her future. When I asked to borrow $5,000 6 years ago to incorporate my business, my father had laughed and told me to stop dreaming. This lawsuit is frivolous, Theodore said. We will file a motion to dismiss. We have evidence, Vanessa said, waving her phone. We have text messages where Audrey admits we were supportive. I knew exactly which messages she meant. They were from 4 years ago, after I had signed my first major contract. I had texted my mother out of habit, some residual hope that success might finally earn their approval. She had responded with, "That is wonderful, sweetie," followed by 3 heart emojis. I had replied with, "Thank you for always believing in me," because I was still desperate enough to pretend we had a normal relationship. 1 text message in 4 years. That was her evidence. "We will see you in court," my mother said, standing. She smoothed her skirt, a gesture I recognized from childhood. It meant she believed she had won. They left the conference room together, a unified front of entitlement and delusion. I watched them walk past the reception area, past the display case with our patents, past the wall of framed articles from industry publications. They saw none of it. They never had. Theodore gathered his papers. They have no case. This will be dismissed within 60 days. They will appeal. Let them. You have documentation of every interaction, or lack thereof. I nodded, but I was not thinking about the lawsuit. I was thinking about my 27th birthday, about sitting alone in that apartment, about the way silence could be so much louder than words. I was thinking about every moment they had chosen Vanessa over me, every achievement they had dismissed, every time I had tried to earn their love and failed. The lawsuit was not about money. It was about their inability to accept that I had succeeded without them, that their neglect had not destroyed me, that I had built something extraordinary from nothing while they watched from a distance and offered nothing. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed I would settle quietly to avoid embarrassment. They had assumed wrong. Growing up, I had learned to make myself invisible. It was easier that way. Vanessa commanded every room she entered, and our parents orbited around her like she was the sun. I existed in the shadows, studying while they celebrated her, working while they financed her dreams, disappearing while they praised her mediocrity as genius. I graduated high school in 2010. My grades were perfect. My test scores placed me in the 99th percentile. I had been accepted to 5 universities with full scholarships. My parents attended the graduation ceremony, but left immediately afterward to help Vanessa move into her new apartment with her boyfriend. They missed the awards ceremony where I received the science department's highest honor. College was freedom. I moved to Seattle and immersed myself in biotechnology research. I worked in the university lab, took extra classes, spent summers in research positions. My phone rarely rang, but I had stopped expecting it to. I sent updates to my family occasionally, out of obligation rather than hope. My mother's responses were brief and distracted. My father never responded at all. Vanessa called me once in 4 years, when she needed someone to watch her apartment while she went on vacation. I said no. It was the first time I had ever said no to any of them. After graduation, I worked for a pharmaceutical company in Portland for 3 years. I was good at my job. I identified inefficiencies in laboratory processes and developed solutions. My supervisor encouraged me to pursue my own patents, to consider starting a company. I was 26, terrified, and desperate to prove I was more than the invisible daughter my family had forgotten. I incorporated Glenspire Health 3 months before my 27th birthday. I maxed out 2 credit cards for the legal fees and initial equipment purchases. I rented a tiny laboratory space in an industrial park and worked 18-hour days. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I slept on a cot in the corner of the lab because I could not afford both rent and business expenses. My birthday arrived on a Wednesday. I woke up at 6 a.m. and checked my phone. Nothing. I waited until 9, thinking maybe they had forgotten the time difference. Still nothing. At noon, I called my mother. The call went to voicemail. I left a message. She never called back. The Uber driver's kindness that evening broke something inside me. A stranger had shown me more consideration in 30 seconds than my family had shown me in 27 years. I cried in my apartment that night, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood that I would never be enough for them. Vanessa would always be their priority. I would always be an afterthought. So I stopped trying. I deleted their numbers from my favorites. I stopped sending updates. I focused entirely on my company. The work was brutal and exhausting and lonely, but it was mine. Every patent, every contract, every success belonged to me alone. 6 months after my birthday, I developed the prototype for the contamination prevention system that would eventually make me wealthy. The design was elegant and simple, addressing a problem that cost pharmaceutical companies millions annually. I filed the patent, refined the prototype, and began pitching to potential clients. The first company that agreed to test my system was based in Denver. The testing period lasted 3 months. The results exceeded their expectations by 40%. They placed an order for 50 units. Then they introduced me to 3 other companies. Within a year, I had clients in 8 states and a waiting list. I hired my first employees, moved into a larger facility, and established relationships with suppliers. The revenue grew steadily. I reinvested everything back into the company, developing new products, expanding capabilities. I worked constantly, driven by something deeper than ambition. I was building proof. Proof that I mattered. Proof that I had value. Proof that their neglect had not defined me. During this time, my family contacted me exactly twice. Once when Vanessa needed a reference for a business loan. I declined. Once, when my mother called to inform me that my father had switched insurance providers and I was no longer covered under their policy. I was 29. I had not been covered under their insurance since I graduated college. The call lasted 90 seconds. I did not tell them about my company. I did not mention my success. What would have been the point? They had never cared about my achievements before. Why would millions of dollars change that? 3 years ago, when I was 30, Glenspire Health reached a significant milestone. We had grown to 75 employees. Our annual revenue exceeded $20 million. Industry publications featured articles about our innovations. I was invited to speak at conferences. Competitors tried to recruit me. Investors approached me with acquisition offers. And then, last year, everything changed. A multinational pharmaceutical corporation approached me about a merger. The deal was complex and extraordinary. They wanted to integrate Glenspire Health's technology into their global operations while maintaining the company as a semi-independent subsidiary. The valuation came to $73 million. I would retain a leadership position and a significant equity stake. It was the kind of deal people spent entire careers hoping for. The merger finalized 4 months ago. The announcement made national news in the biotechnology sector. My photograph appeared in 3 industry magazines. My name was mentioned on a business news program. That was when my family called, not to congratulate me, not to express pride. They called because they wanted their share. They believed that because they had given birth to me, raised me, existed in my life for 18 years, they were entitled to the fruits of the work I had done entirely without them. The entitlement was breathtaking. The delusion was almost impressive. But it was the lawsuit that revealed who they truly were. They were not family. They were strangers who shared my DNA and felt that entitled them to my success. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks after the merger announcement. I received the papers via certified mail on a Tuesday morning. I had been in my office reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant knocked on the door and handed me the envelope with an apologetic expression. I opened it at my desk. The legal language was dense and ridiculous, but the core claim was simple. My parents and sister believed they had provided essential emotional support during my business development and deserved financial compensation. They had calculated damages based on lost opportunity costs for emotional labor and mental anguish from unreciprocated familial investment. I read it twice, searching for any moment where they might have provided support. The document referenced my childhood, claiming they had nurtured my intellectual development and encouraged my academic pursuits. It mentioned my college years, stating they had offered consistent emotional guidance and sacrificed personal resources to ensure my success. It even claimed they had provided critical business advice during the founding of Glenspire Health. Every single statement was a lie. I called Theodore immediately. He specialized in business litigation and had represented me during the merger negotiations. He read through the lawsuit while I waited on the phone, his silence growing longer with each page. "This is extraordinary," he finally said. Not legally sound, but extraordinary in its audacity. Can they win? No, but they can make your life difficult for the next 6 to 12 months. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming even when the case has no merit. I want to fight it. Fighting will be public. Your family relationships will be exposed. Business partners may have concerns about your personal stability. My recommendation is to settle for a nominal amount and include a non-disclosure agreement. No. Theodore paused. Think carefully about this, Audrey. A settlement of $100,000 or $200,000 would end this quietly. You would never have to see them again. They do not deserve a single dollar, and I want people to know exactly who they are. We scheduled the first meeting for the following week. My parents and Vanessa arrived with their lawyer, a man named Gregory who specialized in personal injury claims and looked uncomfortable the moment he saw Theodore. This was not his usual territory. He was accustomed to insurance settlements and car accidents, not corporate defendants with unlimited legal resources. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. My family performed outrage beautifully. My mother cried twice, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while recounting how difficult it had been to raise me. My father spoke about the sacrifices they had made, sending me to good schools and providing a stable home. Vanessa talked about how she had always supported my dreams, how she had believed in me when others doubted. I sat silently through all of it, watching them construct a fictional narrative where they had been loving, attentive parents, and I had been the ungrateful daughter who abandoned them the moment I achieved success. Audrey has always been selfish, my mother said at one point. Even as a child, she only cared about herself. I thought about spending my 27th birthday alone. I thought about calling her that morning and getting no response. I thought about the hundreds of times I had reached out and been ignored. We have witnesses, Vanessa added. People who will testify that we were always there for her. Then bring them to court, Theodore said mildly. Discovery will be illuminating. Gregory shifted uncomfortably. Discovery meant evidence. It meant phone records and emails and documented interactions. It meant my family would have to prove their claims rather than simply making them. The meeting ended without resolution. My family left angry, convinced their lawyer would triumph. Gregory lingered, speaking quietly with Theodore near the door. I could not hear the conversation, but I recognized the body language. Gregory was realizing he had been hired to pursue a case with no foundation. Over the next 3 weeks, I gathered documentation. Theodore had been thorough in his advice. We pulled my phone records from the past 6 years, showing the lack of communication. We compiled emails, demonstrating that most of my messages went unanswered. We gathered statements from colleagues and friends who could testify to my family's absence during significant events. The evidence was damning. It showed a pattern of neglect so consistent that it bordered on intentional. My parents had not attended my college graduation. They had not visited me in the hospital. They had not called on my birthday. They had not responded to invitations to see my company. They had not acknowledged my achievements until those achievements became financially valuable. But documentation was only part of my plan. I wanted them to understand the full scope of their mistake. I wanted them to realize that suing me was not a clever way to extract money. It was a declaration of war they could not win. I began making phone calls. I reached out to journalists who covered the biotechnology industry. I contacted business publications. I spoke with local news stations. I did not mention the lawsuit directly, but I made it clear I was available for interviews about my success story, about building a company from nothing, about overcoming obstacles. The first interview published 2 weeks later in a regional business magazine. The journalist asked about my background, my family, my support system during the early years of Glenspire Health. I answered honestly. I talked about being alone on my 27th birthday. I talked about working 18-hour days with no encouragement. I talked about building something extraordinary without help. The article was titled, "The Self-Made Success: How One Woman Built a $73 million Company with No Safety Net." It went viral in the biotechnology community. People shared it on social media. Other publications requested interviews. My family read it. I knew they did because 3 days after publication, Vanessa called me. I did not answer. She left a voicemail, furious, accusing me of lying to make them look bad. I saved the voicemail. It would be useful in court. Everything was falling into place. My family believed they were fighting for money they deserved. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that would destroy them completely. The second interview published in a national business journal 3 weeks after the first. This journalist was more aggressive, asking pointed questions about family relationships and support systems for female entrepreneurs. I answered carefully, walking the line between honesty and restraint. I did not name my parents or sister. I did not need to. The timeline I provided made everything clear. On your 27th birthday, you were alone, the journalist said, reviewing her notes. That was the same week you incorporated Glenspire Health. Yes. Did anyone in your family acknowledge that milestone? No. What about subsequent milestones? Your first major contract, your first round of hiring, the patent approvals? No. The silence stretched. The journalist was good at her job. She knew when to push and when to let silence do the work. My family and I have different perspectives on success, I finally said. They valued certain achievements. Mine were not among them. The article published with the headline, "When Family Becomes Obstacle, the Hidden Cost of Building an Empire Alone." It included a sidebar about estrangement in entrepreneurial families, citing studies about how family dysfunction often drives business success. The piece was sympathetic, but unflinching. It painted a picture of a woman who had succeeded despite, rather than because of her background. My mother called the magazine and demanded a retraction. The magazine declined. Everything I had said was factually accurate. There was no libel, no defamation, only truth. The lawsuit continued grinding forward. Theodore filed motions to dismiss based on lack of legal standing. Gregory, my family's lawyer, responded with increasingly desperate arguments. He tried to claim that emotional support qualified as a business service. He tried to argue that family relationships created implicit contracts. He submitted affidavits from my parents' friends, people who barely knew me, claiming they had witnessed my family's unwavering support. Theodore tore the affidavits apart in his response. He pointed out that none of the witnesses could provide specific examples with dates or details. He noted that unwavering support was contradicted by phone records showing zero communication for months at a time. He included screenshots of my unanswered emails and text messages, a digital graveyard of ignored attempts at connection. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Constance. She had spent 20 years on the bench and was known for her impatience with frivolous litigation. She reviewed the motions and scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks after the initial filing. I attended the hearing with Theodore. My family arrived with Gregory, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with his clients. The courtroom was small, one of the administrative hearing rooms used for preliminary motions. Constance sat at the bench, reading through documents while we waited. "This is a motion to dismiss," she said, without looking up. "Counselor, make your argument." Theodore stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs claim they are owed compensation for emotional support provided to the defendant. The law does not recognize emotional support as a compensable service in the absence of a formal agreement. The plaintiffs have no contract, written or verbal, establishing their right to payment. They have no documentation of services rendered. They have no evidence of a business relationship. This lawsuit is legally baseless." Constance looked at Gregory. "Response?" Gregory stood slowly. "Your Honor, family relationships are unique. The plaintiffs raised the defendant, provided her with opportunities, created the foundation for her success. Without their support, she would not have achieved her current position. They are entitled to share in the rewards." "Do you have a contract?" "No, but..." "Do you have evidence of a business partnership?" "Not formally, but the relationship..." "Do you have any legal precedent for your claim?" Gregory hesitated. We believe this case establishes new ground in family law and business relationships. Constance closed the file in front of her. I am dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice. The plaintiffs have no standing. Emotional support is not a compensable service. Family relationships do not create automatic entitlement to financial rewards. This is exactly the kind of frivolous litigation that wastes court resources and damages legitimate claims. My mother stood up in the gallery. This is not fair. We raised her. We deserve— Ma'am, sit down, Constance said sharply. Your lawsuit is dismissed. If you file another frivolous claim, I will consider sanctions. We are adjourned. The gavel struck. It was over. 6 weeks of legal maneuvering, thousands of dollars in fees, countless hours of stress, ended in 90 seconds. My family sat frozen. They had genuinely believed they would win. They had convinced themselves that the court would see things their way, that a judge would agree they deserved money for the simple act of being related to me. Theodore gathered his papers. We will file for recovery of legal fees. The dismissal with prejudice means they cannot refile the same claim. We left the courthouse through the side entrance. My family was still inside, arguing with Gregory in hushed voices. I did not wait to hear their reaction. I did not need to. The dismissal was satisfying, but it was not the end. Because 3 days before the hearing, I had discovered something interesting. Vanessa had filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. My parents had co-signed on 3 of her failed business loans, making them liable for her debts. They owed over $90,000 to various creditors. The lawsuit against me had been their desperate attempt to solve their financial problems. They were broke. They were desperate, and they had bet everything on winning a lawsuit with no legal merit. The dismissal meant they lost their last chance at easy money. But I was not done with them yet. The lawsuit had given me something valuable: documentation of their claims, their lies, their willingness to betray me for money. I was going to use that documentation to ensure they never tried something like this again. I scheduled a meeting with a different journalist, one who specialized in investigative reporting on white-collar crime and fraud. Her name was Diana, and she had won awards for her coverage of financial exploitation within families. I sent her copies of the lawsuit, the phone records, the dismissed case file. This is extraordinary, Diana said when we met. Your family sued you for emotional damages? Yes. And the case was dismissed with prejudice? Yes. Do you mind if I investigate their finances? Public records, bankruptcy filings, that sort of thing? Not at all. Diana smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just found an excellent story. I think we are going to write something very interesting, she said. My phone rang 2 hours after I left Diana's office. It was Vanessa. I answered this time. What the hell do you think you are doing? She demanded. I have no idea what you mean. You are talking to reporters. You are making us look bad. I am answering questions honestly. If the truth makes you look bad, perhaps you should have behaved differently. We are your family. You owe us loyalty. Loyalty is not a one-way street. You sued me. You claimed I owed you money for being related. You lost. Now you are angry that I am being honest about what happened. Mom is devastated. Mom did not call me on my 27th birthday. Vanessa was silent for a moment. That was years ago. 6 years. 6 years during which I built a company worth $73 million without any help from any of you. And the moment I succeeded, you decided you deserved a cut. That is not family. That is greed. We raised you. You ignored me. There is a difference. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from anger, from relief. Every conversation, every confrontation, every exposed lie was another step toward freedom. Diana's article published 4 weeks after our meeting. It appeared in a major national newspaper on a Sunday morning, running across 2 full pages in the business section. The headline read, "The Price of Success: When Family Becomes Predator." The article was devastating. Diana had done extensive research. She had pulled court records, bankruptcy filings, loan documents, and credit reports. She had interviewed former employees of Vanessa's failed businesses who described her as entitled and lazy. She had spoken with my former colleagues who remembered my parents' absence during significant company events. She had documented the timeline of neglect so thoroughly that there was no room for alternative interpretation. The article included direct quotes from the lawsuit. My mother's claim that she had nurtured my intellectual development was placed directly next to phone records showing she had not called me in 18 months. My father's assertion that he had provided critical business advice was contrasted with documented evidence that he had refused to loan me $5,000 when I was starting the company. But the most damaging section focused on their financial situation. Diana had discovered that my parents had refinanced their house 3 times to cover Vanessa's business debts. They had withdrawn their retirement savings. They had borrowed from friends. They were, according to multiple financial documents, on the verge of losing everything. The lawsuit had been their desperate final attempt to survive their own bad decisions. The article went viral. It was shared across social media platforms, discussed on business podcasts, referenced in op-eds about family dynamics and entrepreneurship. People were fascinated by the story's stark moral clarity. I was the protagonist, who had succeeded against impossible odds. My family was the antagonist who had tried to profit from that success. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. I received hundreds of emails from strangers, sharing similar stories of family estrangement and exploitation. I received messages from other entrepreneurs who had experienced comparable betrayals. I received calls from business organizations asking me to speak about overcoming adversity. My family, predictably, received the opposite response. My mother's social circle abandoned her. Friends who had signed affidavits supporting the lawsuit now claimed they had been misled. My father was asked to leave the board of his local community center. Vanessa deleted her social media accounts after receiving thousands of angry messages. They were experiencing what I had experienced for years: isolation. But their isolation was earned and public, while mine had been imposed and private. Theodore called me 3 days after the article published. "Your family's lawyer has contacted me. They want to settle." Settle what? The case was dismissed with prejudice. They want to negotiate legal fees and sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement. They will pay your legal costs and agree never to contact you again in exchange for you stopping the publicity. No. Audrey, think about this. You have won. You humiliated them publicly. You exposed their fraud. You destroyed their credibility. This settlement gives you closure. They called me selfish. They said I had abandoned them. They claimed they deserved my success. And then they sued me when the court of public opinion did not work. I am not giving them the dignity of a quiet exit. What do you want? I had been considering this question for weeks, since the moment the lawsuit was filed. What did I want? Money meant nothing to them, because they had none. Public humiliation had already occurred. A non-disclosure agreement would only protect them from further exposure. I want a public apology, I said finally. A written statement acknowledging they were never supportive, that the lawsuit was frivolous, and that I owe them nothing. I want it published in the same newspaper that ran Diana's article, and I want them to pay every cent of my legal fees. They will never agree to that. Then we continue. I have 3 more interviews scheduled. I am considering writing a book about building a company while dealing with family estrangement. I am in discussions with a podcast about doing a 6-episode series on the lawsuit. If they want me to stop talking, they will meet my terms. Theodore was quiet for a long moment. You are playing a dangerous game. Public opinion can shift. People might start seeing you as vindictive. People might see me as someone who refuses to be victimized by family members who contributed nothing and demanded everything. I can live with that. The settlement negotiations took 2 weeks. My family's lawyer, who had replaced Gregory after the dismissal, was a woman named Beverly who specialized in crisis management. She was competent and direct, 2 qualities Gregory had lacked. "Your terms are unreasonable," Beverly said during our first phone call. A public apology will humiliate my clients. Your clients sued me for $24 million based on complete fabrications. Humiliation seems proportionate. They are willing to pay your legal fees and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I do not want their silence. I want their acknowledgement. They will never agree to a published apology. Then we are done here. I hung up. Theodore looked at me from across his desk. You realize they could refuse to settle and simply disappear? They are broke. Their house is in pre-foreclosure. They are living on credit cards. They cannot disappear. They need this to end so they can attempt to rebuild their lives. You are betting they will break before you do. I am betting I understand them better than they understand me. They have spent my entire life underestimating me. They still think I will cave to family pressure, that eventually I will feel guilty and give them what they want. But I am not the invisible daughter anymore. I am the woman who built a $73 million company without them. And I am done being dismissed. Beverly called back 3 days later. My clients have agreed to your terms with modifications. They will issue a written statement acknowledging the lawsuit was without merit. They will pay your legal fees in full, but they request the statement be published on a mediation website rather than in a newspaper. No. National newspaper or nothing. Audrey, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I could have sued them for malicious prosecution. I could have filed a countersuit for defamation. I could have pushed for sanctions. Instead, I am asking for something simple. Honesty. They lied about me publicly. They can tell the truth publicly. Beverly consulted with her clients. It took another week of negotiations, but eventually they agreed. The statement would be published as a full-page advertisement in the same newspaper that had run Diana's article. My family would acknowledge that they had not provided support during the founding or development of Glenspire Health, that the lawsuit had been without legal merit, and that I owed them nothing financially or emotionally. The advertisement would run on a Sunday, the same day of the week as Diana's article. It would be placed in the business section. It would include their names and photographs. It would be permanent and public and devastating. The settlement was signed on a Friday afternoon in Theodore's conference room. My family did not attend. Beverly represented them via power of attorney. The document was 23 pages of legal language, but the core elements were simple: acknowledgement, payment, and permanent estrangement. Theodore handed me a copy. This is over. No, I said. This is just the beginning. The advertisement published 3 weeks after the settlement was signed. I saw it online first, around 7 in the morning on a Sunday. Someone had photographed the newspaper page and posted it on social media. The image spread rapidly, shared and commented on by thousands of people within the first hour. The statement was brief and humiliating. We, Patricia, Gerald, and Vanessa, acknowledged that our daughter and sister, Audrey, built her company, Glenspire Health, without our financial, emotional, or professional support. The lawsuit we filed seeking compensation was without merit and has been dismissed by the court. We deeply regret our actions and acknowledge that Audrey owes us nothing. We wish her continued success. Below the text were their photographs, formal portraits that made them look respectable and dignified, which only heightened the contrast with the admission they were making. The advertisement ran in the business section, page 3, positioned next to an article about emerging pharmaceutical technologies. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story had captured something universal about family dysfunction and toxic relationships. People who had experienced similar betrayals saw themselves in my story. People who had struggled with entitled relatives felt validated. People who valued self-reliance and hard work admired what they perceived as justice. My family's names trended on social media. Their photographs circulated widely. The original lawsuit, Diana's investigative article, and now this public apology created a narrative arc that people found compelling and satisfying. But what happened next was unexpected. Other stories began emerging. People contacted journalists with their own experiences of family members who had sued them, stolen from them, or attempted to claim credit for their achievements. The broader conversation shifted from my specific situation to a cultural examination of family entitlement and financial exploitation. I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. The event was in Chicago, scheduled for 6 weeks after the advertisement published. I accepted, partly because I believed my story might help others, but mostly because I wanted to ensure my family's actions remained in the public consciousness. The conference was large, attended by over 3,000 women from various industries. I spoke on a panel about overcoming adversity in business. When the moderator asked about my family situation, I answered honestly, but without anger. I described the isolation, the birthday I spent alone, the years of silence, the lawsuit. "How did you keep going?" someone in the audience asked. "I built something that was mine. They could not take that from me. They could sue me, lie about me, try to claim credit, but they could not diminish what I had actually accomplished. That knowledge was enough." The audience gave me a standing ovation. After the panel, dozens of women approached me with similar stories. Mothers who had stolen their daughters' money, fathers who had sabotaged their sons' businesses, siblings who had filed fraudulent lawsuits. The stories were endless and devastating and familiar. I realized then that my family's betrayal was not unique. It was simply more visible. Theodore called me 2 days after I returned from Chicago. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Your sister filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office claiming you coerced her into signing the settlement agreement." I sat down at my desk, processing the information. "That is ridiculous." Beverly represented them. The settlement was negotiated over weeks. Everything was voluntary. "I know, but the complaint triggers an investigation. It will be a headache for the next few months." "Can she win?" "No. We have documentation of every negotiation, every communication, every modification to the agreement. But she can create problems." "Of course she can." This was Vanessa's pattern. When direct confrontation failed, she shifted to guerrilla tactics. She filed complaints, spread rumors, created chaos. It was her way of maintaining relevance when she had no legitimate power. What do? We cooperate with the investigation, provide all documentation, and wait for them to dismiss the complaint. It will be annoying but not dangerous. The investigation lasted 4 months. During that time, Vanessa gave interviews to small local news outlets, claiming I had bullied her into signing the settlement. She claimed the public apology had damaged her reputation unfairly. She claimed she was the real victim. The interviews were poorly received. People who had followed the story remembered the original lawsuit, the dismissal, Diana's investigative article. They remembered that Vanessa had sued me for money I earned while she was living off our parents' dwindling savings. Her attempts to reframe the narrative as victimization fell flat. The Attorney General's office requested documentation. Theodore provided over 300 pages of emails, negotiation transcripts, and signed agreements. The evidence was overwhelming. Vanessa had been represented by competent legal counsel throughout the process. She had participated actively in negotiations. She had signed the settlement voluntarily after weeks of discussion. The complaint was dismissed 6 months after it was filed. The Attorney General's office issued a brief statement noting that all parties in the settlement had been adequately represented and no coercion had occurred. But during those 6 months, something shifted in my perspective. I had spent years trying to earn my family's approval, then years trying to succeed without them, and finally months trying to make them acknowledge what they had done. All of it was exhausting. All of it was a waste of energy. They would never change. They would never accept responsibility. They would never see me as anything other than a resource to be exploited or an obstacle to be overcome. The lawsuit, the public apology, the investigation, all of it was just different versions of the same pattern. They wanted something from me, and when I refused to give it, they attacked. I made a decision. I stopped responding to their provocations. I stopped giving interviews about them. I stopped checking social media for mentions of their names. I focused entirely on my company, on my work, on building something meaningful. Glenspire Health continued to grow. We expanded into international markets. We developed new products. We hired exceptional people who shared my commitment to innovation and excellence. The company became larger than my family's betrayal, more significant than their attempts to diminish me. 3 months after the Attorney General dismissed Vanessa's complaint, I received a letter from my mother. It was handwritten, 6 pages long, delivered to my office via certified mail. The letter was an attempt at reconciliation. She wrote about regret and misunderstanding and family bonds. She claimed they had all learned from their mistakes. She asked if we could start over. I read the letter twice, searching for genuine remorse. I found none. The entire letter was framed around their suffering, their embarrassment, their financial struggles. There was no acknowledgement of what they had put me through, no recognition of the years of neglect that had preceded the lawsuit. I filed the letter in a folder with all the other documentation from the lawsuit. Then I had my assistant draft a response on company letterhead. The response was brief. I acknowledge receipt of your letter. I have no interest in reconciliation. Please do not contact me again. I signed it and never thought about them again. 2 years after the lawsuit was dismissed, I received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified herself as Bethany, a producer for a national documentary series that focused on family dynamics and business success. She had followed my story and wanted to know if I would participate in an episode about entrepreneurial achievement and family estrangement. I hesitated. The publicity from Diana's article in The Settlement had been intense but temporary. I had deliberately stepped back from media attention to focus on running my company. Reviving the story felt potentially counterproductive. "What angle are you taking?" I asked. "We want to explore how family relationships can both motivate and hinder success. Your story is particularly interesting because you succeeded specifically because you were not encumbered by family expectations or obligations. We are interviewing several entrepreneurs who had similar experiences. Will my family be contacted?" "We will reach out to them for comment, but participation is optional. The documentary focuses on your perspective primarily." I agreed, partly because I believed the broader conversation about family dysfunction needed more visibility, but mostly because I wanted a definitive record of what had happened. The documentary would be permanent and authoritative, archived and searchable for anyone who questioned the narrative. The filming took place over 2 weeks. The production team interviewed me extensively about my childhood, my education, my decision to start Glenspire Health, and the lawsuit. They filmed in my office, showing the patents on the wall, the bustling laboratory spaces, the team meetings where innovation happened daily. They also interviewed Theodore, who provided legal perspective on the frivolous nature of the lawsuit. They spoke with Diana, who discussed her investigative process. They talked to several of my employees, who described the company culture and my leadership style. And they contacted my family. Vanessa agreed to an interview. My parents declined. I did not watch Vanessa's interview until the documentary aired 6 months later. When I finally saw it, I was struck by how little she had changed. She sat in my parents' living room, wearing expensive clothes she could not afford, talking about how difficult the situation had been for her. "Audrey changed when she became successful," Vanessa said on camera. "She became cold and vindictive. She could have helped us, but she chose to humiliate us instead." The documentary editing was merciless. Immediately after Vanessa's statement, the film showed phone records documenting years of ignored messages. It showed the dismissal of the lawsuit. It showed excerpts from Diana's article. The juxtaposition made Vanessa look delusional rather than sympathetic. The documentary was titled Self-Made: The Cost of Success Without Support. It premiered on a major streaming platform and was watched by millions of people within the first month. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Viewers saw the story as inspirational rather than tragic, a testament to resilience rather than a condemnation of family. But the most significant impact was professional rather than personal. After the documentary aired, I received inquiries from 3 major venture capital firms interested in funding expansion projects. I was invited to join the board of a pharmaceutical research organization. I was asked to speak at universities about entrepreneurship and innovation. My family's attempt to claim my success had, paradoxically, amplified that success. Every interview, every article, every public discussion of the lawsuit reinforced my reputation as someone who had built something extraordinary against impossible odds. The more they tried to diminish me, the more visible I became. I used that visibility strategically. I established a mentorship program for young women in biotechnology, focusing specifically on those from unsupportive family backgrounds. I funded scholarships for students pursuing science degrees who demonstrated both academic excellence and personal adversity. I spoke openly about the challenges of family estrangement and the importance of building chosen families rather than depending on biological ones. The program grew rapidly. Within 18 months, we had mentored over 200 students. Several had gone on to successful research positions or started their own companies. The success stories accumulated, each one a small refutation of the idea that family support was necessary for achievement. My family watched all of this from a distance. I knew they did, because occasionally someone would forward me a social media post or an email where Vanessa complained about my continued success. She had started a blog about family reconciliation and forgiveness, positioning herself as an expert on healing broken relationships. The blog had few followers and received little attention, but she persisted, perhaps believing that eventually her narrative would gain traction. It never did. People who knew the full story saw through her attempts at reinvention. People who did not know the story had no reason to care. 3 years after the lawsuit was dismissed, I learned that my parents had lost their house. They moved into a small apartment in a less expensive part of Portland. Vanessa moved with them, still unable to support herself. The financial consequences of their bad decisions had finally caught up with them. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Not satisfaction, not pity, not vindication. Just a profound sense of distance, like hearing about strangers who lived on the other side of the country. They had become irrelevant to my life, which was the best possible outcome. 5 years after the lawsuit, Glenspire Health reached a significant milestone. Our annual revenue exceeded $100 million. We had expanded to 5 countries and employed over 400 people. Our technology had become standard in pharmaceutical research laboratories worldwide. We held patents on 14 different devices and had 3 more in development. The business publications that had covered the lawsuit now covered our expansion. Articles focused on innovation rather than family drama. I was profiled as a successful biotech entrepreneur rather than a daughter who had been betrayed. The narrative had shifted, and I had controlled that shift through consistent focus on achievement rather than grievance. I celebrated the milestone quietly. I hosted a company gathering at our main facility, thanking the team for their dedication and innovation. I spoke briefly about the journey from a tiny laboratory in an industrial park to an international operation, carefully avoiding any mention of personal struggles. This was their success as much as mine, and I wanted them to feel ownership of what we had built together. After the formal gathering ended, I stayed in my office, looking at the city lights through the window. Portland had been the place where I had spent my loneliest birthday, where I had started with nothing, where I had proven that success did not require family support or approval. The city had witnessed both my isolation and my triumph. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. I saw the article about Glenspire reaching 100 million. Congratulations. I always knew you would be successful. I am proud of you. Love, Dad. I stared at the message for several minutes. The audacity was staggering. 5 years of silence after the lawsuit. Years of watching me build something extraordinary without any acknowledgement. And now, when the success was too large to ignore, he wanted to claim pride. I typed a response, then deleted it. I typed another response, then deleted that too. Finally, I sent a single sentence. You do not get to be proud of something you did nothing to create. I blocked the number immediately afterward. 10 minutes later, another message appeared from a different number. This is Mom. Your father is heartbroken. We miss you. Can we please talk? I blocked that number too. The attempts at contact continued sporadically over the next few months. Different phone numbers, different email addresses, different approaches. Sometimes they tried guilt, claiming they were elderly and wanted reconciliation before it was too late. Sometimes they tried manipulation, suggesting that my refusal to forgive made me as bad as they were. Sometimes they tried desperation, hinting at health problems or financial catastrophes. I blocked every attempt. Theodore had included a provision in the settlement agreement prohibiting contact. Each message was technically a violation of that agreement, which meant I had legal recourse if I wanted to pursue it. But pursuing it meant engaging with them, giving them attention and energy they did not deserve. Ignoring them was more powerful than any legal action. The documentary had one unexpected consequence. I began receiving letters from other people who had been sued by family members. Hundreds of letters, each telling a variation of the same story. Success followed by betrayal. Achievement met with entitlement. Accomplishment punished with litigation. I read every letter. Some were heartbreaking. A woman whose parents had sued her for half the value of the medical practice she had built. A man whose brother had claimed ownership of a patent they had developed separately. A daughter whose mother had attempted to seize her inheritance after the father died. The patterns were consistent. Family members who had provided nothing attempted to claim everything. Relatives who had been absent during struggles demanded to share in victories. Blood relationships were weaponized as justification for financial exploitation. I started responding to the letters, offering advice based on my experience. Document everything. Maintain boundaries. Refuse to engage with manipulation. Focus on your achievements, rather than their betrayal. Build relationships with people who value you, rather than trying to fix relationships with people who do not. The responses evolved into a more formal advisory service. I hired a therapist who specialized in family estrangement and a lawyer who focused on family litigation. Together, we created resources for people navigating similar situations. The service was free, funded entirely by Glenspire Health, offered to anyone who needed support. The program grew. Within 2 years, we had helped over 3,000 people establish boundaries with toxic family members, fight frivolous lawsuits, and build independent lives. Many of them went on to achieve significant success in their own fields, unencumbered by family members who saw them as resources rather than individuals. My family learned about the program through a newspaper article. Vanessa posted a lengthy response on her blog, claiming I had created the program as revenge against them, that I was using other people's suffering to justify my own vindictiveness. The post received 37 views and 2 comments, both negative. Her irrelevance was complete. On my 39th birthday, 6 years after the lawsuit, I took a vacation. It was the first real vacation I had taken since starting Glenspire Health. I flew to New Zealand, rented a small cottage on the coast, and spent 2 weeks completely disconnected from work and email and phone calls. I woke up on my birthday to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of waves against rocks. I made coffee and sat on the porch, watching the ocean, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 6 years ago, I had spent my 27th birthday alone, devastated by my family's indifference. 12 years ago, I had spent my birthday being compared unfavorably to my sister. 18 years ago, I had spent my birthday being told I was not as special as I believed. This birthday, I was alone by choice. I had built a company worth over $100 million. I had helped thousands of people escape toxic family situations. I had proven that success without support was not just possible, but powerful. My phone, which I had turned off for the vacation, stayed off. I did not check social media. I did not read emails. I did not respond to messages. For 2 weeks, I existed entirely in the present, free from the past and unconcerned with the future. When I returned to Portland, Theodore called me into his office. "Your sister is writing a book," he said without preamble. "About what?" "About the lawsuit, the settlement, her perspective on everything that happened. She is calling it a memoir about family estrangement and forgiveness." I sat down. "Is there anything legally problematic?" The settlement agreement included a non-disclosure clause, but it only covered the specific terms of the settlement, not her general experiences. She is being careful to frame everything as her personal perspective, rather than making factual claims we could dispute. Let her write it. You are not concerned? No one will read it. Publishers have already rejected it according to my sources. She is self-publishing. It will sell maybe a few hundred copies to people who already agree with her. Everyone else knows the truth. Theodore looked skeptical. "You are certain?" "I am certain that I am done giving her power over my life. She can write whatever she wants. It does not change reality." The book was published 8 months later. I received a copy in the mail, sent anonymously but obviously from Vanessa. I flipped through it, reading random passages. The narrative was predictable. She was the misunderstood sibling. I was the cruel sister who had abandoned family loyalty for money. Our parents were innocent victims of my vindictiveness. I put the book in a box with all the other documentation from the lawsuit and stored it in my attorney's office. Then I never thought about it again. A year later, on my 40th birthday, I hosted a gathering for the mentorship program alumni. Over 300 people attended, filling a conference center in downtown Portland. These were people who had succeeded despite toxic families, who had built careers and businesses and lives without the support they should have received. I stood at the podium, looking at the faces in the audience, and realized this was my real family. Not the people who shared my DNA, but the people who shared my values and my determination and my refusal to accept that family dysfunction was a valid excuse for failure. 6 years ago, my family sued me, I said. They believed they were entitled to money I had earned without their help. They believed that being related to me gave them ownership of my success. The lawsuit was dismissed. The settlement was brutal. And everything that happened afterward proved that success does not require family support. It requires determination, resilience, and the willingness to walk away from people who diminish you. The applause was thunderous. After the event ended, I stayed to talk with attendees. Person after person shared their stories, their victories, their ongoing struggles. I listened to all of them, offering advice when I could, encouragement always. Around midnight, after everyone had left, I walked back to my car alone. The streets were quiet. The city was peaceful. I felt no anger toward my family, no lingering resentment, no desire for further revenge. They had sued me, humiliated themselves publicly, and faded into irrelevance. I had built an empire, helped thousands of people, and created a life defined by achievement rather than grievance. The consequences for my family were severe and permanent. My parents lost their house and their savings, living out their retirement in poverty created by their own poor decisions and desperate lawsuit. Vanessa remained unemployed and bitter, dependent on parents who could barely support themselves. Her book sold fewer than 100 copies. Her blog was abandoned after 2 years of futility. They became cautionary tales in articles about family litigation, examples of what happened when entitlement replaced rationality. The lawsuit they filed to claim my success became the defining failure of their lives, a permanent record of their greed and delusion, archived in court documents and newspaper articles that would exist forever. I built something they could never touch, succeeded in ways they could never comprehend, and walked away from them without looking back. The revenge was not in destroying them. They destroyed themselves. The revenge was in proving that I never needed them at all.